G'day, welcome to Goat Fantasy. Nice to have your company. It's the Errol Goulden edition. Goat Fantasy brought to you by checkmyrates.au. Visit the website. It's free to use. Take control of your financial future. Brandon and the team will help you get a better home loan rate. Wish I was coming to you with better news this afternoon on the Goat Fantasy podcast, but you most likely would have already seen. Unfortunately, Errol Goulden has been ruled out for 4 months after he dislocated his shoulder in the win over the Lions. So Sydney were faced with a difficult decision here. Ultimately, doesn't seem like the conversations really went on that long once they had scanned the shoulder and seen the extent of the damage. The only course of action in their mind was to go in for surgery. So I guess the crux of it is that Errol could have played through this ailment for the rest of the season, but he would have been risking multiple dislocations, and he may have just ended up in the position that he's in now, which is that he needed to have surgery, and then that would rule him out for the rest of the year. So as it stands, he misses roughly 15 games, and that puts him in a position to be back for the latter part of the season. And how much this news hurts as a fantasy coach really depends how invested you are in Errol Goulden. I've got him in a couple of draft leagues because I believe that he is going to be something close to M1 this season, and of course so many of us are invested in him in salary cap formats, whether that be Supercoach or AFL Fantasy. So it just puts us in a situation where we've been forced into a trade in the first round of the season through injury to one of our premiums, which is unfortunate because he was set for another massive score before getting injured against the Lions, and he had already posted a 126 in opening round. So a lot of decisions need to be made about where we go from here, and we're not going to delve too deeply into that because we are going to have a trade targets podcast on Goat Fantasy, and a lot of that will be discussed there. But clearly there's two ways of going about this, which is the sideways trade to another premium, or it's the downgrade to make cash. And it seems like the popular consensus around the fantasy community, particularly in AFL Fantasy, is that you cash up ahead of Nick Dacos coming off his bye and in the next round. So whether that's a rookie fix-up that you've missed or down to a Braden Cook or something like that. There's a few different ways you can go. We'll talk about the potential sideways moves, but because of the unreliability, it seems, of the premiums in the midfield who don't have a bye, it does put us in a bit of a bind. So interesting one, and decisions for us to make straight away, but we're all in the same boat because Errol was such a popular player. And it's just such a shame because he'd made such a great start to the season. He was going to be a knockout pick and one of our favourite players to watch in the league. Certainly, maybe I'm just feeling it more from a personal perspective because he is a great player and a nice person, and also a very popular fantasy player. But it is pretty crappy news on this Monday to bring to you, just around the league in terms of injuries that are affecting us. So I reported this morning, no concussion test was required for Noah Anderson after he got a knee to the head late in the Eagles game. So he will come to Melbourne and take on Richmond later in the week, and he is good to go. So that's good news for those who are invested in Noah Anderson ahead of a Richmond matchup. So Todd Marshall was forced off during Port Adelaide's loss to North Melbourne with an ankle injury, so he's avoided serious damage, but will need to be assessed. I mean, I think it's ultimately unlikely that he's going to play this week against Essendon, so unfortunately I think Todd Marshall is someone who you're going to have to trade out this week, or if you have bigger priorities, hold for another week. But I think for those with Marshall who don't have Cook, feels like a pretty easy move sideways there, and it looks like Cook's going to be a reasonable pick. So that's one way out there. Matthias Philippou hurt his quad, started relatively well. I mean, I think the role is good for Philippou, and something we flagged on Goat Fantasy is we just need to see it. And as much as the role has been good, the scoring hasn't come as easily for Philippou in this early part of the preseason and the first 5 quarters that he played before getting injured. So as much as he has a nice role, and I think he has a lot of potential as a player, apart from those few games, a few years ago, which we talk about, he hasn't shown a huge amount of fantasy upside. So I think that experiment is coming to a close. If you did pick him, understandable because of how underpriced he is. In Supercoach, even cheaper And because we don't know the extent of the injury, we'll get an update on Tuesday. This looks like he might be a hold. He's still probably going to make some, a decent amount of cash because of how cheap he is in the Supercoach format. So Filippo a blow, Marshall likely to miss this week. Of course, Goulden, the absolute hammer blow from an injury perspective. Looks like Anderson's going to be okay. It is a tricky round to navigate with a few buys floating around. But ultimately, we have to make this decision of what to do with one of our most expensive players and someone who we're really hanging on hat on as being one of our top scorers throughout the season. So Errol Goulden, 4 months. Dr. Peter Larkins today offered us a little window of hope. He said you could come back from it in 3. And certainly the Swans are being conservative with their 16-week or 16-game timeline for Goulden at this stage. So the Swans also sweating on the fitness of Isaac Heaney. So, a 5-day break heading into their game against Hawthorn does create an interesting scenario for them through the midfield. One player of note in certainly draft would be Justin McInerney. I wonder if he gets a bit of a role change, a bump in CBAs after a decent start to the season from him. Certainly opening round, he was impressive. He's not going to play like that every week, but there's spots up for grabs in the midfield. The other one that sort of sprung to mind was Angus Sheldrick. Not the same type of player. And of course, Errol Goulden is impossible to replace for the Swans, but maybe Sheldrick gets a little bump in CBAs. It really all depends on the way that Dean Cox thinks that Goulden needs to be replaced. Is it the pure running power through the midfield? Is it someone who can run and spread and get the ball in their hands? And they might have to get a bit creative with that because obviously Errols don't grow on trees. But that's one to monitor. They've got the bye coming up, so it allows us to make some decisions if we need to about any Swans players to pounce on off the back of that. I know Matty Roberts has spent a bit of time on the wing and doing his thing. Potentially he might get a little bump. Remains to be seen. Jake Lloyd hanging around as well, who was good the second part of last season. So, let's just wait and watch to see how that affects the Swans midfield. So, a bit of a gut punch to welcome us back into AFL Fantasy and Supercoach season, losing Errol Goulden. But I hope you enjoyed the weekend across the board, filled with all the normal highs and lows that come with fantasy sports. So I just wanted to give you a rundown of what we're looking at GOAT Fantasy. So a trade edition. I'm thinking something like Monday Rage trades or something of that ilk each week, just because that's where our head's at on a Monday. We're thinking about trades and who to bring in. So we'll provide some analysis mixed with our normal newsy content about the players we're targeting this week, and then we'll do the mailbag call out on Monday nights. So players that you have questions about, whether it's from a draft perspective or fantasy, Supercoach, whatever it might be, just drop their name and a question in the mailbag segment, and then that allows me hopefully 24 hours, let's say, to get my ducks in a row, do a bit of research, speak to clubs, etc., and try and come back with the best information I can for you as part of the mailbag. So there's your second sort of regular podcast of the week. And then Fridays, we always do our weekend preview with Warnie from the Traders and DT Talk. So there's your 3 sort of key pillars, and then any news that drops throughout the week, such as this Errol Goulden injury, opportunities I get to go out to clubs and speak to different people about players and injuries and form and whatever it might be. That'll all be mixed through. So what we should end up with is a reasonable week worth of content to keep you going, which hopefully is supplementing what you're already consuming. We don't want to overload you, and hopefully everything's nice and consumable in small bites. So just keep an eye on social media. We're going to do our best to ramp that up as much as we possibly can. So with Luke and Darcy on board, it's a really exciting year for GOAT Fantasy, and hopefully we can take things to a new level for you. So if you're already a regular listener, I appreciate that you're coming back and consuming the content, and we'll do our best to put forward the absolute best product that we can. And I hope you're feeling okay after a big weekend. So some trade stuff to come. Mailbag call out will happen soon, all brought to you by checkmyrate.au. Thanks for being involved in GOAT Fantasy. Keep coming back.